pjnet.tv. It is Thursday night, 9 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States. It's time for PJNet Live. We have a bumper running. Let's check. We are recording, yeah. And we are streaming on 9 social media platforms. Bumper is running. Our guest is standing by in the green room. Chat room's waiting. Let's switch to Studio 8 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, good evening. Welcome to PJNet.tv. It is great. We are well into another week. In fact, kind of for me, we're winding up because tomorrow night I have the night off as Steve Hazards takes the controls. But on my last night of the week, I look forward to visiting with our guest who's waiting to be brought onto the stage all the way where it's still daylight outside. Ken, how are you doing, brother?
Hey, I'm doing well.
I can see that, and I have noticed there are some cards adorning the wall behind you. They have been there for some time, and I think one of them says, Happy Birthday. How often do you have birthdays, Ken?
Once every 5 years.
Once?
No, every year.
Slows down the aging process, because I'm getting pretty tired of these laps around the sun, and it gets hard to do. So anyway, Ken, you did you go to church last night?
I sure did.
So your church is having church? Yes,
actually went Tuesday night. Our campus has the live service on Tuesday night.
I see. Okay. So. And we've been watching and monitoring churches respond, react, or run away, or go to sleep. Where are we today? Where do you think we'll be in 3 months? Or is this the new normal?
Unfortunately, I'm afraid this is the new normal for a while. Until either enough people get the COVID-19 virus and survive. Hopefully the younger people will accomplish that for us. And then we'll start building up more of a herd immunity. And then by that time, hopefully the vaccination will be ready. As long as we don't have to worry about it having some kind of a chip embedded in it, we'll be able to build up an immunity that way. And we can maybe by next year at this time, life will be hopefully back to normal. But I do think at the current time and pace, we are in the new normal for at least the next 6 months.
Well, let's look at the old normal, because I have been critical of the old normal for some time. Just for a foundation, a baseline. The typical modality of a church is to acquire a piece of property. That's expensive. In a good location, that's expensive.
Very expensive.
Then build a building, which is expensive. And then air condition that building, which is expensive. Staff that building with professionals with PhDs and masters in divinity and all that. I thought a master of divinity was like a baker, that made. Remember divinity? And basically, we're open once or twice a week, and the building stands empty for a great portion of the week. So I have never considered the modality of the old normal very efficient.
Well, actually, the church is not the building. It's all the people that go into the building for equipping and training. And that's really what the church is designed to do. And so more and more younger contemporary churches are not using the traditional buildings, but they are actually taking like a warehouse and converting it. Or many of the new church plants are starting in schools, and every week they'll set up and tear down so that it has the opportunity to use the building in a much more cost-effective way. I actually question sometime like you, Coach, if a church spends $25-30 million to put up a piece of property that is only used a handful of times during the week, is that the most cost-effective use of our dollars? Would we be more productive to use those dollars for evangelism and ministry to equip the saints locally and around the world and not have quite such a fancy place to live in? But then the question comes up, would people come to a warehouse or someplace not so fancy? I think they would when the people have it right.
Well, other churches have gone on the other side of the equation and said, well, the building's empty. Let's use it as a daycare facility throughout the week.
And that does produce some income. But typically, from my experience, what I've seen is the income is many times offset by wear and tear on the building, especially when you have lots of children running around doing different things. If you had a way to use the building in a way with adults or older, well, really with adults would be the best bet, because they would respect the building the most rather than students or children. And you might find ways to be able to, recoup some of your cost. But
okay.
It is a dilemma.
I didn't want to spend too much time looking in the rearview mirror, but I think it's important that we, as we adapt, we need to know where we're coming from, because we've positioned ourselves poorly for this.
Well, fortunately, many of our churches have a good online presence. And the churches that have a huge online ministry have done the best in reaching people through this COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, many churches are reaching 2 to 3 times as many people through technology than they would with people coming in the door. And that's even in spite of the people that are just sitting at home. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about tonight, about the effects of COVID-19 on church attendance and what Barna has shown in their new study.
Let's hear it. I'm interested.
Okay. Well, this is hot off the press. It's only been out about a month. On July 8th, Barna Research Group published a new study. And what they showed was the effect of the online church attendance versus the physical attendance before COVID-19 hit. And so here's kind of the breakdown of the numbers. 35% of the people still are attending the same church that they did physically before COVID-19. There's actually a few, about 18% additional people that are viewing more than one service. That's one of the reasons why our numbers are going up with online presence. I know my wife and I, some Sundays when we were home back in March and April, when we didn't go anyplace, we were watching 2 and 3 different church services on Sunday morning, plus our own church on Saturday night. And it would be a great way to learn what other churches are doing and how they're involved. So 18% actually would be, according to Barna's research, would be attending more than one. But the interesting part, 32% of the people that normally would attend church quit attending any kind of a service on premise or online through the internet. Now, the first thought would be to look at that and say, well, that's just the older people that don't like technology, or maybe they attend an older church that's not equipped with an online. But when you dig into the numbers a little bit more, Coach, the numbers for millennials is 50% of the millennials are not attending church, have stopped attending church, even online altogether. And the millennials, you think, would be the ones that would be the most adept to online presence. And you can't blame it any longer on the normal distractions of, well, we got family activities, we're going on vacations, we got sports leagues, all the different things that normally distract people and keep them from going to church. In fact, many pastors would say before COVID-19 that a lot of Christians would only attend church once every 3 weeks.
Right. The summer slump is sort of a axiom out there, and I think too often it was used as an excuse for not giving, making the effort. But during the summer, there was a tendency to throttle back.
Yeah, but we can't use that this year because all the governors, had the stay-at-home order. We got to keep everybody quarantined so that they'll be safe and sound and won't spread it to everybody else. And that's a whole another subject in itself that we've talked about many times on PJNet. And we could go into tonight in a large degree in the pros and cons and the different arguments there. But I think we have a different problem. I think we have a church that's disengaged. A church that understands going through the motions, but a church that really doesn't have a fire and a passion for God. You know, the other night I was, actually last night, I finally listened, to our friend Ben Cooper when he was talking about his Bible and the camouflage and the not the little salamanders, but the way God
chameleons.
The chameleons. That's exactly right. And it's amazing to me how God has taken and really prepared nature to cope with things like that. But anyways, we were talking, and you asked the question about the divorce rate between Christians and non-Christians. The way people handle their money, the alcohol addiction, different problems that we face in the world today. And in many cases, there's not a difference between the churchgoers and the Christians. And I think the cause for that is we're disengaged. Our tanks are running on empty.
When you say, Ken, we are disengaged, are you talking about church leadership or the constituency?
Well, I would think it would be the constituency, the members, the attenders of the church. Now, some of that criticism could be tied back to the leadership of the church not keeping up or keeping people engaged, or not changing with the times in order to make people their services relevant to the younger generation today. I'm sure there's both ways, but as individuals, we need to take responsibility for our own walk with God and make sure that our spiritual tank is full and running over so that we can serve God out of our abundance rather than out of our weakness or our loss. Kind of reminds me when we moved to New Mexico 11 years ago. We hadn't been out west very long, and our family was on vacation up in Colorado, so we were driving back from Denver, crossed over the Raton Pass, and got into the northern New Mexico, and came to this little teeny town called Raton, New Mexico. I looked down at my gas gauge and I said, "Oh, I've got almost a quarter of a tank. I'll be all right. I'll get gas down the road just a little bit." So I started driving, and I drove a little farther and a little farther, and I thought, wow, am I going to find a gas station, or when am I going to find a gas station? And I see a sign that says, "Next gas, 79 miles. Well, fortunately, we made it. We found a station that was open 24 hours a day that nobody was at. It was a self-serve, unmanned station that just was available 24 hours a day, and we were able to gas up. But you can't get very far when your tank is empty. And I think that's really where, as a church, we're running into problems. We need to hunger and thirst for God. We need to find that place to where we long for more of the Lord in our life. Our society has changed so much. Culturally, it's not the acceptable thing like it used to be. In fact, I was doing a little research in preparation for this. From the Great Depression era up until about the year 2000, about 70% of Americans, adults, were members of a church. But in the last 20 years, that's dropped by 20%. Now, a lot of the people that have dropped out in the last 20 years have been disengaged for even longer. But I think it's so easy if you've grown up in the church to sit there on the pew, to sound like a Christian, to dress like a Christian, to act like a Christian, but our hearts are far, far from God. And so we got to find a way as believers in order to fill that tank up so that we can have a passion for God out of the abundance of our soul rather than the emptiness that's in our heart. So you remember when I was on a couple weeks ago filling in for JD, and we talked about the three T's of giving. And I shared about, I'm trying to remember his name right now, Basil Pascal, if I remember right. I think I have his first name
Pascal,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And then he was the one that's credited with using or developing the concept as a writer that we have this God-shaped vacuum in our life and that can only be filled with God. And that as Americans, we try to fill it with stuff. And we talked about that we have to, we can't fill it with the stuff. We've got to fill it with us giving and, and our relationship with God. And so we've got to find a way to fill our hearts with the Lord and build that passion for God so that we can be the men and women that God has called us to be. Probably the best verse of scripture that I can think on that is Ephesians 5:18. It says, "Be drunk with wine," in the King James, "but be filled with the Spirit." And the Greek word there for filled, and I'm not a theologian, but I'm told that it is an active word. So it's a constant refilling, day by day by day by day by day. It's not just getting saved and sitting on the pew. It's actually communing with God, worshiping God, spending time with God, being filled with God's Spirit more and more so that out of the abundance of our heart, we can continue to serve Him. And that's, I think, where we need to go. Matthew 5:6 tells us, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they'll be satisfied." I remember, and you probably can identify with this where you're at in North Florida. I remember a few times in Tennessee when it would get so dry, the land would crack. Have you seen that, Coach?
We get there all the time. You walk across the grass. It's like it's winter and the grass is frosted and frozen. It's crunching as you walk.
Yeah. What it's doing, it's begging for moisture. It's crying out, "Give me rain, give me rain, give me rain." And as Christians, we need to cry out and ask the Lord, fill me with your Spirit. Psalms 143 says, "I spread out my hands to you. I thirst for you like a parched land." And the only way that we'll get that rain, that filling, is by spending time with the Lord. In fact, Ephesians 5:19 says, "Speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord." Learning to worship God, spend time, enjoy time with God all the days long. And I think that's really what we're missing. We do our Sunday thing, but we pick God back up on Sunday when we go back into church. You mentioned not too long ago about a blog that I wrote last year, the one about our overstuffed closets. And in that story, I talked about how that when I was growing up, initially the house we lived in was a little two-bedroom house. It had little teeny tiny closets. And everybody's got closets, even in our big houses today, that are just overstuffed. But almost every home, at least the homes that have Christians, according to my blog, they have a little box sitting on the shelf. And it's a place where they store God during the week. Mm-hmm. And when it's time for church, they go and they get that box off the shelf. Or if they don't go to church very often, when they run into a problem, we cry out to God. And we run and go get the box. Mm-hmm. Rather than letting God be part of our life on a daily basis. That's what we need if we're going to take and really have an impact upon this world. If we're going to see our churches change and we're going to see life not get to the place to where the world overcomes the church. I believe we're on a real dangerous path. And if we're not careful, within a few years, within 20 more years, we could live in a really different world, and we could be suffering persecution for our faith. We need to take that back our world for Christ and redeem our world and stand up and be known for God.
Kenn, we need to talk. The issues that you have brought up are serious. The indictments that you have made, the consequences are serious. And I place a lot more of the burden of responsibility on church leadership than you do, perhaps. But this is an opportunity or it's a test. Are we going to wait for our church leaders to engage us, or are we? It's not really a matter of taking the church back. It's a matter of taking ourselves out of the cages that we have erected for ourselves at the behest of church leadership. We need to build a new building, we're out of time. I would like to revisit this, Kenn, because you are striking a chord that will resonate into the next 20 years, and how that melody sounds is up to us right now. And it's very challenging, and I appreciate you bringing all this up. It's serious.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting in the chat room and hearing what all of our PJNet family is saying inside the chat room, because we've got some great people that are part of this PJNet family. And they're the ones that are willing to help take this back for the Lord and see God stir our hearts for revival. Thanks for being here tonight, Coach.
You got it, Kenn. All right, folks, that was Kenn Edwards here on pjnet.tv, and we are only getting started. That's the beginning, because in just a few minutes we will be taking our weekly trip around the Cross W Ranch with J.D. Winninger. Folks, what you have just heard is challenging, and I hope that you keep this in your hearts, and we'll compare notes later. I got to go. I'm going to ask you 2 questions on the way out. What is the boldest thing you have ever done for Jesus Christ? Go to church, maybe? The second question is, well, how long ago was that? Folks, we have heard the clarion call tonight. We are at war. And in many cases, we're not even fighting. We are surrendering without a battle. If we are going to take the battle seriously and win, we can never allow ourselves to be satisfied with either answer.